Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Maeley Tom, President and CEO of APAICS, the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. Thank you for tuning in to our APAICS In Conversation today. We are honored to be joined by two grand dames of the API public service and political community. Ginger Liu will be our interviewer today. She is a senior advisor at Eagle Creek Renewable Energy, and she has held several senior leadership and management positions in public and private sectors. Prior to joining Eagle Creek, Ginger served as senior counselor to President Obama's White House National Economic Council. Ginger served as general counsel for the U.S. Department of Commerce, and earlier in her career, she was chief counsel for the U.S. Department of Energy and deputy administrator and chief operating officer for the U.S. Small Business Administration. And our guest for today is Maeley Tom, who has been called one of the most powerful and influential non-elected political figure in the Asian American community because of her career accomplishments and contributions to the empowerment of the Asian American voice in politics and government at the state and national level. During her 20-year career in the California State Legislature, she was the first woman and person of color to serve as the Chief Administrative Officer of the State Assembly, and subsequently served as the Chief of Staff to the President of the State Senate. Her 30 years of campaign experience includes serving as the Deputy Director of the California Dukakis Presidential Campaign and as an advisor on Asian American issues to the Clinton-Gore presidential campaigns. Her last campaign was leading the Asian Leadership Task Force to re-elect California Governor Jerry Brown in 2010. In May, her book, I'm Not Who You Think I Am, An Asian American Woman's Political Journey was released worldwide. If you are joining us on Facebook, please put your questions in the comment section. And if you're joining us on the webinar, please put them in the chat. Please welcome Ginger and Maeley.
Madeline, thank you and APAICS for arranging this webinar with today's featured speaker, Maeley Tom. Many of you have heard the phrase, power behind the throne, which is the perfect description for Maeley. If you speak to anyone about California politics, especially AAPI politics, every person will tell you to talk to Maeley Tom. Maeley, so good to see you today, my dear friend.
Thank you, Ginger. Nice to be here. And I just want to quickly thank APAICS for giving me the honor to be a part of your program, because APAICS has made such a significant contribution to the presence of Asian Pacific Americans and especially on the national scene. So thank you.
So Maeley, you've demonstrated that you can be extraordinarily powerful without having to be elected to an office or confirmed by the legislature. I know our listeners are very interested to learn more about you, so let's get started. Your professional career has always reflected a strong commitment to making our community a better place, not just the AAPI community, but also your active civic engagement in Sacramento and throughout the state of California. Can you share with us how your upbringing, being brought up by a number of family members and surrogates in different households, influenced you as an adult?
Actually, my title, I Am Not Who You Think I Am, reflects the part of me that has not been very public, and that is my very unusual, untraditional upbringing as a child. And I was raised in a foster home for the first 8 years of my life, from the time I was a 2 weeks infant. But being raised in that culture really gave me a different type of a background in terms of, I was raised by a European Basque woman who really expressed positive reinforcements for kids to have free expression, to have emotion, to have compassion, and to really feel proud of your achievements. So I grew up in this environment for 8 years. She would always brag about how smart her Chinese kid was. You know, I walked early, I sang by the time I was 2 years old, I was entertaining by the time I was 3, I skipped 2 years in school. So as a result, the positive reinforcement I got for these super achievements really ingrained in me that that's the way I could get positive attention, because I didn't have any parents to provide that support base. So I was driven now to excel because that's how I got attention. When I was in school and when I was growing up, I wanted just to be everywhere. I wanted to run for office in school. I wanted to be popular. I became a cheerleader. I joined clubs. It was now driven in me to be, to excel because of the positive feedback I got from that. I also feel that my success and my driven passion to prove myself, to prove my self-worth, made me realize that I wanted to always succeed. I never wanted to fail because I felt failure was then a weakness. So I had that sense of perfection in me, and had to realize early that you're not going to always succeed. And so I had to also learn that I can't take failures in my life personally either. So that was a learning experience, but it also gave me a chance to learn the value of evaluating myself. Where was I strong? I used the strength to promote myself. And if I felt that I wasn't strong or I was weak in a certain area, I definitely pursued avenues of how I could improve myself. So you could tell I was very driven at a very young age because of this upbringing that I had. And being on my own at a very early age, which is in the book that describes a very unusual path I had through my childhood and youth, I had to really learn personal skills and social skills very early because I had to compensate for the fact that there was no one there to help provide these values for me. And, you know, developing social skills and people skills really allowed me to kind of learn how to fit into the different neighborhoods that I was thrown into my life because I had different environments that I grew up in. And the family and my neighborhood and friends really represented my family network. And it was so important for me to fit in. And to be able to fit in, you have to learn the people skills, and you have to learn how to understand the rules of the game, even at that early age. How are you accepted in school, even though you have an awkward family situation? And I did that really by observing, emulating, and finding common ground with people so that I would be able to approach those people, especially people I admire, respect, or seen in leadership positions, to kind of help me be accepted and help me to fit in. And I found those attributes really to be helpful in my career. So that's why I always say the first 8 years of my life pushed me to develop those skills. Growing up in different environments from here, which will be in the book, of different environments that I had to endure, it also helped me learn to be flexible, learn to adapt to different conditions. And it was a quality that helped me flow in the political environment because the political environment is so dynamic. It's constantly changing. So I had that skill of how to just what we call go with the flow. And I think when I faced adversity, being on my own from the time I was 14 years old, I had to force myself to learn how to solve problems on my own. And I think this eventually was an attribute to me as I started my professional career, is my ability to solve problems. And so these are just some of the influences of my childhood that I felt really, quite frankly, gave me a positive beginning to start a career in politics. So I don't dwell on the negatives of what my struggles were in my youth and childhood. Instead, I really am grateful for the attributes that it gave me to succeed in politics. But trust me, I didn't do this all on my own. I did it because there were so many wonderful adults and friends that I met along the way during my very unusual youth. And I never hesitated to ask people for help. And I never hesitate to let people know what I didn't know, which is something I continue to do in my professional career. But I also found that the mentorship I relieved was my safety net. And that's why there's no question that I continue that same passion of paying it forward by mentoring others.
Maeley, clearly your upbringing encouraged you and taught you to be part of a larger community, because that community was the means by which you could survive and thrive. I noticed in your book that in the mid-1980s, you started to get involved in national politics. What drew you to that arena, and what were some of the highlights? And can you also talk about the role of APAICS and why it is so important?
Well, actually, how I got into national politics is the person who's talking to me at this point, the person who's interviewing me. Thank you, Ginger. As you know, and part of my road in politics was that when I worked for the state legislature, I used that opportunity when I joined Democratic politics in the state parties to put together the first statewide Democratic Leadership Convention, where I brought all the Asian Pacific Islander ethnic communities under one roof, so that we forced gubernatorial candidates for the first time in history to address Asian Pacific Islander issues. And we did that by bringing the Koreans, the Japanese, the South Asians, the East Asians, the Filipinos. I said, let's come together because we have a wider base and we have the numbers to demand attention. The state convention proved to be very successful, and it was kind of historical. So I got a call from this wonderful icon, Ginger Liu, in DC, who said, you know, I think it's time for us to duplicate the efforts that you did in California. And by that time, Ginger had started a National Asian Pacific Democratic Leadership Group. And she wanted to use that as a vehicle with the Democratic National Committee to now bring together a national API audience to now force presidential candidates who before this event only talked about Black and Browns. They never talked about Asian Pacific Islanders. So with Ginger's guidance, with Susan Lee, who was executive director, and I had a wonderful co-chair, Barbara Miyamoto from Los Angeles, we put together this first national Asian Pacific Democratic Leadership Conference, where presidential candidates, this is when Dukakis was running, actually came before us and discussed Asian Pacific issues before a public forum in the first time of history. And I guess this kind of catapulted my name in the national scene, where I was seen as a national leader. And I was asked to, Senator Roberti was asked if they would loan me out to become a deputy director for the California Dukakis presidential campaign. I think it was the first time where Asian American had a pivotal senior role in a state campaign such as California. And from there, I became involved with helping to develop agendas. Guess what? In the National Convention, during the '88 convention, there was no Asian Pacific Islander agenda. They were there for the Latinos, the Blacks, the gays, all the other special interests. So Ginger and myself and a lot of amazing delegates who were there, we put together our own agenda, just so that we would have some recognition in that '88 convention where there was no events for Asian Pacific Islander. I think from that time on, Ron Brown decided to run for chair of the Democratic National Committee. And he came for me for help because he wanted to be a rainbow coalition. So I, in effect, then helped Ron Brown with his election to become DNC chair, and then subsequently also became a committee member of the executive committee of the Democratic National Committee, which is the governing committee for the Democratic Party. And I think the rest is pretty much history in terms of my involvement in national politics, and to be able to use that opportunity to really engage other Asian Pacific Americans to understand we need a voice at every platform of democratic politics or Asian politics or Republican politics. You just have to take that opportunity when it rises. So that's how I got involved in national politics. I have to say that this is, I'm very proud to say, I think Ginger and I were right there when APAICS started. It was under a different name. I think it was under Kapachi. But the reason why we felt that this was another historical moment was because now the Asian Americans had an institution based in Washington, D.C. that has now changed to APAICS, but it represents the voice of Asian Americans on the national scene in partnership with the Asian Pacific Congressional Caucus to have that combination of influence and power under the leadership now of Madeline, where she has expanded this program, not only to educate, not only to empower, but to also train the future leaders who are going to take over take Asians into the next step of leadership in this country is to me such a proud moment to see where APAICS is today, because it continues to expand the role of what we have to do in empowering Asian Americans. And that's why I'm also honored to be on this program.
Maeley, thank you very much for that. And I wholly endorse your comments about APAICS in terms of its influence. Clearly, its internship program, fellowship programs have launched a number of Asian Pacific Americans into public policy roles, and that's another way of building that pipeline of future leaders. This is a question from one of our listeners, Glenn Fukushima. So, what is the most important message or lesson you would like your readers to take away after reading your book?
The most important message, I think, is that if you have had the opportunity to succeed, to gain influence, to have a network of influential people, and you have access, that you need to pay that forward. Because what is the value of having all of these experiences, all of the great opportunities that you have been a beneficiary of, if you don't pay that forward, or else it becomes a selfish entity? And I think, to me, that's what I wanted to emphasize most. If we're blessed to be where we are in terms of success and influence and leadership, my heavens, our duty is to pay it forward. Our duty is to look back and to bring forward all the young, potential, exciting talent of this generation to move the Asian Pacific American movement forward.
So, Maeley, you have one of the largest fan clubs I know, myself included. You have many, many supporters from a wide spectrum of organizations, ethnic and women communities, Republican and Democrats. I remember speaking to then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, who raved about you at that time. How did you go about building this coalition? And can you give us an example of how this impressive network of influential people helped you overcome what you thought was a major professional challenge?
First of all, I think now that I've given everybody a little taste of my background, how I wanted to be Miss Everything to Miss Everybody and to be liked by the entitled universe, I really worked on enjoying people and helping people and engaging with people. I genuinely like people. And I think people feel that. People feel that connection. And one of the things that I have going for me that a lot of you don't have is I've had decades, 50 years of experience with the political arena, with the Asian community. And when I worked in the Capitol, I worked with legislators from both sides of the aisle. And no one was, I mean, everyone to me was very important. And I tried to make them feel that way. And I found that these friendships from the Capitol and legislators really expanded my influence, because many went on to Congress, many went on to be elected in state elected positions, and many went on to work in private sectors in the corporate world. And I kept these relations. My husband always says about me, he says, you know, Maeley, she never loses friends. She just adds friends, because I always keep in contact with a lot of people. If they keep in contact with me, it's just so engaging for me to do that. I think that having the years of of experience I've had in working with the Asian Pacific community from the local, state, and national level has really helped me expand my network of Asian Americans in all fields, and people who have crossed my ways or who've just picked up the phone and said, Maeley, this is happening. What do you think? I mean, all those relationships stayed with me and I stayed with them. But I think working with trailblazers, Asian trailblazers to help make history, they to me impressed and inspired me to be where I am. And those relationships still exist. And if you notice in my book, everyone who worked on those conferences, whether it be the state or the national conference, I made sure that they were recognized at the end of the book because they were there and they were the network that I relied on to help build these institutions. But I guess I can also say that the mentorship of so many young, eager, talented, skilled professionals that I have worked with through my years have really stayed in touch, many of them. And they come back and talk to me about paying it forward. So when you combine those three entities that I've been really lucky to be exposed to, the network just has been expansive and I've been really blessed, really blessed.
Well, Maeley, I know you have a huge network of people who refer to you as Auntie Maeley. But I also just wanted to acknowledge a shout out from a gentleman named Art Wang from Tacoma, Washington, who said that he hasn't seen you since the I guess 90s. But to your point, that you've maintained a very robust network and connection with people that you've run into throughout your life. Now, another question I've had is that you've met a lot of famous people and had some extraordinary experiences in your life. Can you share with us what is your most memorable famous moment?
Famous moment in terms of?
Well, whether it's a famous person or a most memorable experience with a famous person. I mean, yeah, I've seen pictures in your home of you and Bill Clinton, and you and Hillary. I mean, with all sorts of glamorous people. So,
it's going to be hard for me to just name one, but I will tell you one person who also really impressed me and I was enamored with him, and that was Ronald Reagan. When I met him, ironically, he just totally blew me away. He was so charming. I think a lot of the presidential candidates that I worked with really were impressive. But I think people who helped me in terms of who they are today and really took time to mentor me, to criticize me, and to make me stronger was a state senator. I don't know if you remember, but he could have been governor, but and his name is State Senator Art Torres, who now is on the UC Board of Regents. And another woman who just gave me the best lessons of my life. And today I still go to her when I need her. And that's Congresswoman Maxine Waters, who still calls me baby from this time. She still calls me baby. So I think those people have been probably who've touched me the most.
And you've talked about how you've mentored people over the past years and worked with a number of young people. Given that we are living in some extraordinary times, there's COVID, and whether it's so much is being done digitally and virtually, and if people want to get involved in a campaign or in public policy, what advice might you have for them, just given that it's now a virtual world? Before you would go and have coffee with somebody, or you have lunch with somebody, you meet somebody. How would you suggest that people sort of build out their networks given this virtual environment?
If it has to do with getting engaged with politics, the first thing you do is you choose a candidate that you really admire and respect, Get on the phone, see how old I am, get on the phone. But anyway, I think the greatest way to start in anybody is to volunteer in campaigns. Because, and I don't see a lot of that with Asian Pacific Americans, but believe me, the way to gain attention with elected officials is when they see those Asian faces in their campaigns helping them, and you bring recognition to your own community. I think it's a very basic, elementary way of getting involved, but candidates pay attention to their volunteers. And if we could get more Asians just volunteering their time, whether in our days it was, I started with John Kennedy, where, you know, I was helping him helping the campaign seal envelopes. I mean, that's how basic it was then, but so much different now. I think there's social media where Asian Americans can use their social media network and work with campaigns to say, I want to help this candidate win. I can help do this. I think that's a very elementary way of doing that. Also to seek fellowships. There's a lot of fellowships in a lot of political arenas. And, you know, to take training like APAICS. APAICS program, and we have a Capital Academy program in the California legislature that's led by this amazing woman, Annie Lamb, where we train local elected officials. APAICS trains the best and brightest to seek office, or even how to excel within the structure of a legislative environment. And we call that staff training. But for Asian Americans to get involved, to enroll in these amazing programs is a good way to get started.
And one last question as we come to the close of this webinar. What does it mean to you to be a resilient leader, especially in these times?
Ironically, my boss, the Assembly Rules Chair, the late Lou Papin, he said to me one day, I couldn't believe it. He says, you know, your greatest attribute, Maeley, is your resilience, because you have been able to bounce back with all the adversity and challenges that you faced as a minority woman in executive position in this political environment dominated by white males. And I think a lot of my ability to bounce back is the fact that I was always so determined, starting from my early youth, to succeed. I wouldn't let obstacles stand in my way. I only had myself to fight for myself. So the only way I was able to succeed was to find ways to work around obstacles, or at least to admit if I couldn't work around obstacles, what fallback solutions would I have? And I just simply wouldn't allow people to try to see me fail. And there were a number of those. And I guess adversity is really a way that you can test your strength too, because, you know, if we see adversity, and I did in my time, then you have to just count them as a lesson learned. You can't buy into it, and you can't deal with the negative. You just have to say, okay, it's a lesson learned. I didn't do well here, or this person doesn't like me. It's a lesson learned. How can I make that person like me the next time around, or whatever? And there's a saying that eventually things that hurt me teach me. And there's you know, me, Ginger, I always love quotes, right? It's kind of my philosophy. But there's also a quote that I feel very kinship with, and it says that it's not about how fast you run or how high you climb, it's how well you bounce. And so that's kind of my philosophy. And you know that, Ginger, you've been such a dear friend of mine. You've seen me bounce from time to time from adversity that I've faced. And thanks to people and the network that you mentioned, that I was able to enjoy, they're there. That's how you found, that's why networking is important, because you develop allies who want to help you succeed. But you only can develop those allies if you help others succeed.
Thank you so much, Maeley.
Oh my gosh, I think I would want to, continue this conversation even more. And unfortunately, we are out of time. I myself can say that I am a beneficiary of both Auntie Maeley and Auntie Ginger for my years prior to being at APAICS and having worked with both of you for many years doing fundraising and political consulting. So I have so much thanks to both of you for all that you've done for us in the API community. Thank you so much for joining us today. And to our audience, join us next week, August 10th. That's Monday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. We will be joined with special guest Michelle K. Lee, who's the former Undersecretary of Commerce and United States Patent and Trademark Office Director. And so please sign up at the RSVP link on the APAICS website. So thank you so much for joining us today and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Madeline.
Thank you.
And my book's available on Amazon.
The link's there.
Thank you.